All right, good morning, everybody. I guess it's about time to go. My name's Shawn Thompson. I'm an applications engineer with MICROMO Electronics. I've been with the company for 23 years. We're mainly a distributor of miniature DC motor products, high-end products, and I'm here to give a little presentation on linear motion. If you're in the medical design field, many times you'll see a lot of linear movement applications. There's a lot of transference of rotational motion to linear motion. If you see a lot of syringe drive pumps, many times that's a motor with, could be a rack and pinion drive or a lead screw arrangement. And in these applications, obviously you're looking for reliability, obviously, in medical applications, affordability, modular design. You need to have many times efficiencies as well, and they're looking for smaller applications, obviously small pumps, even robotics. And we've done a lot of research type applications as well. So you're doing XY stages, you're doing a lot of optical manipulation, cell analysis, and they want them to be, practical for their applications. So the designers are looking for different ways to do these linear movements. Some of the robotic applications in surgical robotics, they're concerned about ergonomics. They want them to be small, able to be moved around. They don't want to use a lot of effort to move the machines around. Efficiency is important. Robust. They don't want them to fall apart, obviously. Economical, and they want to get these to market right away. That's a big thing these days. The first one there is important. And how do we generate linear motion? Bulk of it is usually rotary motion that is transferred to a ball screw, possibly, maybe a rack and pinion. We do a lot of servo motor applications. Steppers are also used in a lot of functions. We also use solenoids, and linear servos are getting more popular now. Piezoelectric actuators are becoming more pronounced in the markets. They are very good for high precision actuation. You're looking at nanometer resolution when you're trying to do cell analysis. It becomes very critical for that positioning. And when you're looking at your application, every one of them is going to be different. Even if you're doing a similar application compared to another product, there's always differences between those two. And you're trying to find out what exactly you're trying to accomplish at the end. When you're looking at the application, you have to know, if at all possible, what your requirements are as far as shaft speed. You're looking at duty cycles, how long you want the unit to last. All these are going to play into your choices on what you're going to put into your design. Efficiency is always a big one when you're looking at portable applications. You're always going to be looking at a battery system, so you have to find out in the end how all of your components are going to work together to meet, in most cases, battery life. So you have to look at your priorities. You have to make choices on where you're going to put your efforts and make decisions on what part of the device is going to require more effort than maybe another one. Uh, a lot of, as I mentioned before, a lot of the applications you're using brush motors simply because they're so prevalent and they're very efficient in most cases, and it allows you to uh, typically use a ball screw or a lead screw to transmit from rotary to linear through a nut. These motors allow you fast accelerations if you're doing critical positioning, and speed is of the essence. They're good on the efficiency and in most cases low EMI as well. The brush motors tend to be a little noisier, but even a brushless motor, the electronics are typically PWM, and those tend to be noisy in the device. You have reduced lifetime with a brush motor because the life is dictated on how long the brushes are going to survive. And you have a limited speed range depending on the typical or type of motor that you're using as far as a brush. As I said before, many times there's syringe drive pumps, pole mount feeding pumps have used these types of devices for quite a while. In the brushless rotary, you want long life, obviously, if you're considering those. Robustness, they tend to be a bit more rugged. High speed is definitely an advantage with brushless motors. You can overdrive a brushless motor, say a 12-volt motor. You can run those sometimes with 36 volts to achieve 40, 50,000 RPM. And they're also a clean operation in the regards that if you're sensitive to brush debris, as the brushes wear, that debris can work its way out of the motor and get into other parts of your device which you're concerned about. Trade-offs for a brushless motor are cost, and now you have to involve the drive system to operate it, which in most devices that's incorporated within the electronics anyway. And miniature insulin pumps are starting to use more brushless motors due to their robustness. Brush motors can tend to be kind of finicky in those small devices. You're talking maybe a 4 millimeter diameter motor. That's awful small. The stepper motors, they're essentially a brushless motor. They're easy to drive. That's the number one benefit probably for a stepper, is that most people like the simplicity of the drive. It's on the lines of a brushless motor, but not as much complication in the drive arrangement. They're lower cost as compared to a brushless where you're needing an encoder, where you don't have to have an encoder with a stepper motor. Very stable in position, so you can shut the power off and it'll keep its position. It won't float. And repeatability, that can be an option that some people like, to move to the same position. It stays in that same position. It doesn't drift. And accuracy. The trade-offs are discrete motion, because now you have to work within the step count. If it's stepping in between an area that you want, it can be rather difficult. They're limited in speed, and the resonant frequency depends on the particular build of the motor that you're using. Those resonant frequencies change, and you also can have harmonic problems. Linear stage slides are used in that. There's a lot of optics applications that use the steppers as well. Gearboxes add torque and the other side is it reduces the speed. But when you're looking at a small package and you're trying to get more power out of it, you're typically going to have to get gearing in there. The gearing can cost you noise trade-offs, but in a lot of cases, it's just something that you have to use. The bad side is backlash. You have to contend with that lost motion in there, and usually the best way to get around that is to measure what you're moving. Instead of using the encoder on the back side of the motor, use an encoder to measure what you are moving. You're way better off in that case. And the usual choices for most gearboxes, not necessarily medical, but anything, is spur and planetary. Planetary is what you're going to find always in your automatic transmissions in your car. They're very robust. They can handle more torque and more abuse. So when you're looking at what kind of actuator you need, in the picture here you're looking at a ball screw. Those are typically very quiet, but they're very expensive. They translate the forces very well. They can handle the thrust and radial forces as well, but they are typically very expensive. You have to be careful about the environment with these. If you don't have sweepers on the screws to clear off any debris, then you can run into problems of damaging the balls. And threaded rollers, those are best for heavy duty, and in most cases you're looking at larger devices like tables that you're trying to operate, move up and down on a patient. Rod style and rodless, you're determining which you're moving, the load, or if you're trying to translate back through that. Solenoids are something that are a very simple device. You're only looking at two movements, forward and back, and you don't have any positioning capability within that range. So you're looking at very rudimentary types of movements when you're doing that. Many times that's just a simple door operation where you're just trying to move from one position to another. You're not trying to get any kind of positioning between there. And the speed is typically just single speed. As I mentioned, a door operation is very common. The linear motors are something that's new coming on the market now. Linear motors have been around for a while, but they're typically quite large. They're now getting much smaller, and these are a nice way to get linear motion moved into some of the newer products. In this particular design, this is the rod that goes through the motor, and it's actually moving back and forth through the motor. In most other large-scale linear motors, the motor's moving along a rail, and this is kind of an opposite effect. And the size that you're looking at anymore, you can get down to like a 1/2 inch size on the square part of this function right here. Also, in this case, there's a positioning capability of like 3,000 counts over that movement, so you're getting down into a couple of microns of precision. The nice thing about the linear motors in this case is you reduce the amount of error that you get in the coupling. Many times when you're using the lead screw or a motor combination with gearing, you have the backlash in the gearing. You have to couple all of those systems together, and now you're concerned about your output when you're looking at, in some cases, the encoder counts that you've got at the motor you have to compensate for all that lost motion in there. There's a lot of hysteresis that you have to account for. In these motors, you've got a nice force to volume ratio. They're very fast for acceleration, and they're quite easy to put into your system. Another advantage is, in some cases, lubrication free. The bearings are a sleeve device, so you're not concerned about contamination. And in this case, medical imaging is a good example where you're trying to position particular optics. In some cases, this is used in X-ray work or manipulation of optics in research. They're a bit costly at this point. You do have to be concerned about, let's say, water contamination getting on the shaft that gets into the motor. It could be a problem, so you have to be wary of that. Heat generated, in that case, you're bolting, the body of the motor down, which is going to transmit the heat, and the force density is a little lower compared to the larger motors anyway. And piezo motors are another motor that's becoming more and more used these days. They tend to be rather large, and they've used them quite extensively on XY stages for research work, where they're looking at cell structures, they're looking at sampling, and when you're looking at nanometer resolution, that's where you have to be concerned with that. The piezo motors are now getting into a smaller size. You're looking at something the size of a one square inch footprint, and the nice thing about these is they can be totally non-magnetic. So when you're looking at magnetic imaging, these are a good solution for operation in that environment. As I said before, you're looking at nanometer resolution, and in these motors, they tend to, as you see here, they have a walking function. So they have a ceramic substrate that they're actually moving with the piezo elements, and they tend to behave sort of like a stepper motor, where when you shut the power off, they'll stay in place. They're not going to drift. And it's basically a voltage-based movement. The drivers or drive system for these types of motors is not very complicated at all. It's a nice package. They've used these in a lot of fiber optic applications as well. When you're positioning mirrors, fiber optic, when you're looking at wavelength splitting, nanometer positioning becomes very critical. It's a backlash-free device. There are there's other piezo motors that have extremely high acceleration, but the distance traveled is very short. So if you've ever seen a cell manipulation where they're actually puncturing a single cell with a needle, they want to do that very quickly. They don't want to push the cell in or the needle in slowly like you would with a motor and a lead screw. They want to move it in very rapidly to cause less damage to the cell structure. And that's one of the applications they've used those for. They don't have any EMI noise as well. Vacuum compatibility is another nice benefit. Like I said, single cell penetrations are a good example. They tend to be rather expensive, though. They are limited on their stroke length, and resolution as far as rapid movement. They take a while to transverse their movement. And here's a few examples. This is a hexapod. That's a 6-axis movement robotic device used for spinal surgery. And each one of these has a brushless motor, gearbox, and lead screw in it, which manipulates this device here into the spine. Dermoscopes are used. They're using some of these applications in that field as well. In this particular application, there's a piezo motor in this head, and it's actually pressing the device onto the cornea of the eye for an eye test. And the positioning is very critical as well. The sensitivity of the eye. They have to be quite careful in that area. And that's the conclusion of the presentation. If there are any questions or anything, feel free to let me know.